When Jackson Tate stepped into the penthouse nursery, he expected to find peace, or at worst, the quiet fussing of his infant son. What he didn't expect was another woman's body cradling his child in the most intimate, life-saving act imaginable. What happened next shattered his grief and reawakened everything he tried to bury. The Tate penthouse hadn't known joy in months, not since Evelyn died giving birth. Now its polished silence pulsed with sorrow. Air too still, shadows too heavy. Upstairs, baby Cole's cries had softened to something far worse, silence. The nanny had slipped out hours ago, left behind only spoiled formula, a tepid bottle, and an unattended child. Downstairs, Chantel James scrubbed glass that didn't need cleaning, trying to escape the memory of her own baby boy, Caleb, buried just 6 months ago. But Cole's fading cry pierced through grief and habit alike. She told herself not to go, told herself it wasn't her place, but her feet moved anyway. She found him limp, burning, starving, dying, and something primal broke open. Chantel's body had refused to forget Caleb, and in her grief, it had never stopped producing milk. Now, standing over a child who reminded her so much of the son she'd lost, she made a choice. One act of love, one defiance of death, one moment that blurred the sacred and the unthinkable. And as Jackson stepped through the nursery door, everything he thought he knew about grief, love, and fatherhood began to unravel. Before we get deeper into this unbelievable story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your country. Your engagement helps us bring more real-life inspired stories to you. Now let's right into the story. Jackson stood in the nursery doorway, breath caught in his throat. The late afternoon light slanted through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. And there she was, Chantel, cradling his son against her chest, feeding him, feeding him. Time stopped. She gasped when she saw him. Her eyes widened, arms tightening instinctively around Cole's tiny frame. "Mr. Tate, what are you doing?" His voice cracked like glass, sharp and brittle. "I had to." He was burning up. He hadn't eaten. The milk upstairs was spoiled. He was so weak. Jackson stepped inside, slow and shaking, his face unreadable. "You think this is normal?" "No, but he was dying," Chantel stammered. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she carefully buttoned her blouse with trembling hands. "I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't let him die." "Not again. Not again," he echoed, his tone dark, distant. She opened her mouth to explain. Caleb, the funeral, the empty crib. She still hadn't moved. But he cut her off. "You crossed a line," he said flatly. "That's not your child. You had no right." "I had love," she whispered, clutching Cole tighter one last time. "Sometimes that's the only right that matters." He reached out to take his son, and as Chantel handed him over, Cole whimpered, then screamed. "No, baby, it's okay," she whispered, trying to soothe him with her voice. But Jackson had already pulled away. Cole's wailing rose in pitch. His tiny fists clenched in protest. His face turned red. "Stop," Jackson snapped. "You've done enough." Chantel took a step back, her heart splitting open. "He needs comfort. That's all I gave him. Comfort, like a mother would." "You're not his mother," Jackson said, cold as steel. "You're fired." The words hit like a slap. She nodded once, lips trembling, and walked out without another word, each step feeling like the one she never got to take with Caleb. Downstairs, the front door shut behind her like a final heartbeat. Upstairs, Cole kept crying. Rebecca stepped into the hallway moments later, slipping her phone back into her purse. "You're back now?" Jackson asked, rocking Cole awkwardly. "Traffic," she lied. "I didn't know anything was wrong." He didn't respond. just stared at his son, who kept sobbing harder with every second. Rebecca's stomach twisted. Chantel had seen too much, done too much. She couldn't let Jackson find out the rest. Outside, Chantel stood at the curb, hands shaking, heart aching. I did what I had to do. A single verse whispered through her brokenness. Whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. Her legs gave way. She dropped onto the sidewalk, sobbing into her palms. And inside the penthouse, Cole screamed louder, his cry sharp, searching longing for the one person who had held him like heaven still had a voice. Cole refused the bottle. Jackson sat on the edge of the leather couch, cradling his son in his arms, heart pounding as he tried again. The formula dripped onto Cole's lips, but the baby turned his head away, arching his tiny back, fists trembling in protest. "Come on, buddy. You need this," Jackson murmured, desperation creeping into his voice. He tried rocking, patting, humming. Nothing worked. Cole's cries only grew sharper, more frantic, like he was searching for something the room didn't have. Rebecca stood awkwardly nearby, arms crossed. Maybe he's just colicky, or teething. Jackson shot her a look. He's not teething. He won't eat. She shrugged. Well, he'll eat when he's hungry enough. Babies do that. But Jackson wasn't so sure. There was something different about this cry. It wasn't hunger. It was grief. The sound gutted him. By midnight, the penthouse felt like a prison. Cole's wails echoed off the high ceilings like a siren. Jackson paced the nursery floor, shirt rumpled, eyes bloodshot. He'd tried warm baths, white noise, even calling Rebecca back in to soothe him. Nothing worked. Cole screamed until his throat went raw. By 2 a.m., Jackson gave in and called the pediatrician. Dr. Lyman arrived half an hour later, gentle and calm, even as Cole continued to howl. She ran her tests, checked vitals, examined Cole's chest and throat, and finally sat back with a sigh. Physically, he's fine. Fine. Jackson rubbed his temples. He hasn't eaten in almost a day. He won't stop crying. Dr. Lyman gave him a long look. Mr. Tate, infants experience emotional trauma more deeply than we sometimes realize, especially at this age. If a baby bonds with a caregiver, and that bond is suddenly broken, they can respond with physical symptoms. Jackson stiffened. You're saying this is emotional? Yes. It's called separation trauma. It can be serious. If the baby formed a strong attachment to someone, and that person is suddenly gone, it can trigger this kind of distress. And if it goes on too long, the exhaustion and dehydration can become dangerous. Jackson's throat tightened. He bonded with the maid? Dr. Lyman hesitated. It sounds like he bonded with someone who loved him deeply. He looked down at Cole's red, tear-streaked face. The baby's eyes were wild with panic, not hunger. He was looking for her, for Chantel, and Jackson had sent her away. A rush of guilt flooded his chest, thick and burning. For a moment, all he could see was Evelyn's face the day she died, and the way he'd shoved all that grief into work and silence. All the moments he never held Cole, never looked him in the eye. Now this woman, this stranger, had done what he couldn't. She had fed him, held him, loved him. He'd fired the one person who saw Cole as more than a duty. Cole let out one final sob and went limp in Jackson's arms, breath shallow, body trembling with exhaustion. Cole, Jackson's voice broke. Hey, buddy, no. But Cole didn't respond. Jackson fell to his knees beside the crib, clutching his son, panic rising like a flood. For the first time in months, he bowed his head and whispered, God, please, don't let me lose him too. The hospital room was too white, too quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft hum of machines. Cole lay in the bassinet, a tangle of wires and tubes far too big for his fragile body. Jackson sat beside him, motionless. His hand rested near Cole's, hoping for even the smallest squeeze. Nothing. The pediatric specialist's words echoed in his head. His condition is emotional in nature. He may not fully recover unless the emotional bond is reestablished. The guilt hit like a freight train. He hadn't just lost his wife. He'd been losing his son in slow, invisible pieces. And now the one person who had reached him was gone because of his pride. Outside the hospital, Rebecca paced near the parking lot, arms folded, sunglasses shielding her expression. When Jackson approached, she plastered on a smile. "Any change?" "Still not eating," he replied flatly. "They're worried." Rebecca let out a soft sigh. "Poor thing. Probably just overstimulated from all the drama." His eyes narrowed. "Drama you helped cause." Her expression hardened. "Excuse me. You said Chantel acted inappropriately. That she overstepped. But the more I think about it, the more it doesn't add up." Rebecca scoffed. "Are you seriously taking her side?" Before Jackson could reply, a man in a hoodie approached from around the side of the building. Rebecca stiffened. "Got the stuff?" the man asked, eyeing the small brown bag in her hand. Jackson stepped forward. "What is this?" The man froze. Rebecca's face drained of color. "It's just some extra infant meds from Cole's prescription," she muttered. "They don't need all of it at the hospital, and he's paying me." Jackson's voice turned to ice. "You're selling my son's medication?" She stammered. "You don't understand. I needed the money. And Chantel, she was getting too close, too emotional. I made it sound worse than it was." "You lied," he said, jaw clenched. "You left him alone. You wanted her gone." Rebecca didn't deny it. Her silence screamed guilt. Jackson didn't yell. He just looked at her like she was a stranger. "Leave. Don't come back." That night, Chantel sat at the edge of her bed, holding a tiny blue sock. Caleb's. She still hadn't packed away his things. The rumors had started to spread, whispers from neighbors, mostly stirred up by Marla Downs, who never missed a chance to judge. She was feeding someone else's child. In that way, some people will do anything for attention. Chantel clutched the sock tighter, tears burning. "God, I only did what love demanded." A quiet knock at the door broke her thoughts. She opened it and froze. Jackson Tate stood there, disheveled, eyes rimmed red, holding Cole's blanket in one hand. "I was wrong," he said, voice barely audible. "I need your help. He needs you." Jackson's fingers hovered over his phone for the third time that hour. "Number you've reached is no longer in service." Again, he stared out the hospital window, the city's glow smudged behind the glass. Cole's tiny body lay still, save for the rise and fall of his shallow breaths. There wasn't time. He raced to Chantel's last known address, an empty unit. The landlord shook his head, moved out right after she lost her job, said she couldn't stay somewhere that reminded her of her baby. Jackson drove aimlessly at first, then frantically, stopping at shelters, clinics, bus stations. People either hadn't seen her or looked right through him. He stopped at a small, corner church, stained glass flickering in the night. The door was locked, but he dropped into the steps anyway, head in his hands. "God, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be what my son needs. I've failed everyone. Evelyn," her name still hurt. He remembered how she smiled when she picked nursery paint, how afraid he was to tell her he didn't feel ready to be a dad, how she died before he ever got the chance to become one. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. A man's voice. "You the guy looking for that girl? Think I saw her. Near 47th and Elm. Bus bench." Jackson didn't think. He just ran. It had started to rain. The bus stop was dim, shelter barely holding off the wind. And there she was. Chantel sat huddled, soaked to the skin, her arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes fluttered closed, exhaustion pulling her under. He rushed forward. "Chantel." She looked up and froze, then turned her face away. "You don't get to show up like this," she said quietly, voice hoarse. "Not after what you did." "I know," Jackson said, standing there in the pouring rain. "You're right. I don't deserve to ask you for anything." "Then don't," she whispered. Silence sat heavy between them, broken only by thunder and the rattle of passing cars. He dropped to his knees in front of her, water soaking through his pants, his hands trembling. "I broke something in you that was already broken. I can't take that back." His voice cracked. "But my son, our son, needs you. Please, I'm not asking you to forgive me. Just help him live." Chantel's lips parted. "You said he wasn't mine." "I was wrong." He swallowed. "He may not survive the night." She stared at him. Rain rolled down her cheeks like tears. "You shattered me," she said. "I had just started to breathe again, and you crushed it." Jackson lowered his head. "I know, but don't do it for me. Do it for him. He remembers you. He needs you." A long silence. Then Chantel stood, knees stiff, body shaking. "I'm not doing this for you, Jackson." She looked him square in the eyes. "I'm doing it for Cole." When Chantel stepped into the hospital hallway, everything seemed to pause. Nurses turned, whispered. One placed a hand over her heart. She moved with slow purpose, still soaked from the rain, hair clinging to her cheeks, exhaustion in every step. But her eyes were locked on the room at the end of the hall. Jackson trailed behind her like a shadow, unsure if he was witnessing mercy or a miracle. She entered the room. Cole lay motionless, machines clicking softly. His skin was pale, his lips dry. She walked straight to him. "Hi, baby," she whispered, kneeling beside the bassinet. "Mama's here." A beat passed, then another, and then his eyelids fluttered. His tiny fists twitched. His heart monitor beeped faster, stronger. One of the nurses gasped. "Vitals are improving." Chantel reached out, cradled him gently, humming low and soft, a melody only he would know, a sound he'd memorized somewhere deep inside him. The crying stopped. He nuzzled against her as she adjusted her blouse and guided him close. He latched immediately, like he had been waiting, like he had never forgotten. The room fell still except for the soft rhythmic sounds of life returning. A doctor rushed in, eyes wide. "Check monitors. Double-check the chart." "This is near impossible," she muttered. "He's stabilizing." Jackson watched from the corner, hands trembling, throat thick. This woman, tired, hurting, barely standing, had walked into the valley of death and turned it inside out with nothing but love. And she hadn't just saved Cole. She saved him too. His knees nearly buckled. He sat in the nearest chair, silent tears running down his face. No titles, no wealth, no ego. Just a broken man watching a miracle unfold. Chantel stayed beside Cole all night, whispering prayers and lullabies, brushing her fingers through his dark curls. At one point, he opened his eyes and looked straight at her. She smiled, voice trembling. "There you are, baby." Sometime after 3 a.m., Jackson stepped forward. His voice was soft. "Thank you." Chantel didn't respond. "I didn't know how to grieve," he said, eyes on Cole. "After Evelyn died, I shut everything out, even him. I thought I was keeping him safe, but I was keeping me safe." Still she was quiet. "I judged you," he continued, "without knowing your story, without honoring what you lost." He paused. "I'm so sorry." She looked up at him, eyes tired but calm. "I forgive Cole." Jackson blinked. "You forgive him?" "Yes." She looked back at the baby in her arms. Because none of this was his fault. He just wanted to be held. Jackson nodded slowly, but the air between them stayed heavy. "And me?" he asked, voice raw. Chantel's face stiffened slightly. "Not yet," she said. "You don't just break people and fix it with tears." She turned her focus back to Cole. He sighed quietly and sat down again, this time beside her. "I'll wait," he whispered. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. The air in the press room buzzed with tension and curiosity. Jackson Tate stood at the podium, shoulders squared, face solemn. Behind him, the logo of Tate Industries shimmered on the wall. It was the same place he'd stood before to speak about market shares and acquisitions. But today wasn't about business. It was about truth. He cleared his throat. "I want to begin with an apology." Whispers broke out across the crowd. "I made a mistake," he continued, voice steady but soft. "A woman in my employment, Chantel James, was wrongfully accused and unjustly fired. The truth is, she saved my son's life." Gasps. More flashes. She stepped in when no one else did. While I was drowning in my own grief, she became the hands and heart my son needed. He paused, emotion tightening his voice. "And I judged her for it." Jackson scanned the room, eyes brimming. "I assumed the worst. I believed lies. And in doing so, I not only endangered my son, but I broke a woman who was already carrying more grief than I ever cared to ask about." He stepped back from the microphone, shoulders dropping like a burden had finally been set down. By evening, the headlines had shifted. "Tate apologizes. Nanny's act was heroic, not harmful. Chantel James, the woman who loved a child back to life." The scandal turned to sympathy, the judgment to honor. At the hospital, Jackson stood outside Cole's room with Chantel. "I want to offer you your job back," he said, "but not as staff." She frowned slightly. "I mean it," he said, "not as a nanny, as family." Her lips parted, caught off guard. "You don't owe me anything, Jackson," she said gently. "Not after all this." "I know, but I owe him a chance to heal with the one person who helped him breathe again." Chantel looked through the glass. Cole was stronger now, sitting up in bed, watching cartoons with tired eyes. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted. "Not yet. I'm still repairing." Jackson nodded. "So am I." A soft cry came from the room. Chantel turned to see Cole, arms stretched out toward the glass. His eyes locked on hers. And in that small gesture, something holy filled the space between them. Chantel's breath caught. "That boy," she whispered. "He remembers love." She stepped into the room, and Cole cooed with delight. She scooped him into her arms, holding him like she'd never let go again. Jackson stood back, watching with quiet reverence. "I'll stay," Chantel said over Cole's shoulder, voice barely audible. "But only until he's fully stable. One day at a time." He nodded. "That's more than I deserve." She didn't argue, but as she sat beside the bed, she reached out, just enough, for him to pull up a chair next to hers. And for the first time, they sat side by side, not as strangers, but as people beginning again. Weeks passed, and the hospital room became a nursery of hope. Cole no longer clung to life, he chased it. His cheeks grew rounder, his eyes brighter. He laughed now, a soft, gurgling sound that made every nurse stop and smile. And at the center of it all was Chantel. She fed him with a tenderness born of loss and love. She sang to him as if her voice still reached into heaven and back. Jackson watched it all unfold with quiet awe. At first, he kept his distance, unsure of his place. But one afternoon, Chantel handed him a worn children's book and said gently, "He likes this one before naps." Jackson blinked. "You sure?" She smiled. "He needs his dad too." So Jackson sat by the crib, reading awkwardly at first, then softer as Cole blinked up at him, eyes slowly closing. That night, he stayed long after Cole fell asleep. "Evelyn would have loved him," he whispered. "She was the brave one, the better one." Chantel sat beside him, silent. "I was scared," he admitted, "of being a father, of failing. And when she died, I shut the whole world out." Chantel looked down. "I know that kind of fear." He glanced at her. "Caleb would have been one next month," she said, voice barely above a breath. "He had my eyes, his daddy's smile, and a heart that didn't stay long enough." Jackson didn't speak. He just reached over and gently took her hand. The days blended into a quiet rhythm. Walks in the hospital garden, shared meals in the cafeteria, soft laughter over spilled formula, and bedtime books. One evening, they both stood over Cole's crib, watching him drift to sleep. Jackson leaned closer. "You've brought him back to life, and maybe me too." Chantel looked up, startled. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing," he said softly. "But I can't ignore what's growing between us. I care for you, Chantel, deeply, but I'd never ask more than you're ready to give." She stared at him, heart pounding. For a moment, the hospital faded. The past, the pain, all of it grew quiet. "I feel something too," she whispered. Jackson's eyes searched hers. "But it terrifies me," she added, stepping back slightly. "Every time I love, I lose. My son, my peace, my place in the world. What if I open my heart again, and it breaks all over?" Jackson didn't reach for her. He just nodded. "Then we take it slow. No pressure, just presence." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know how to love without fear." "You don't have to," he said gently. "Just love anyway. I'll walk through the fear with you." Chantel opened her mouth, words forming, but a nurse peeked in, interrupting. "Sorry," she whispered, "but the baby's waking up." They both turned, drawn by Cole's stirring, and as Chantel leaned over him, she felt Jackson's presence behind her, not pressing, not demanding, just there. It wasn't a romance yet, but it was something holy, something healing, something real and terrifying. The garden was quiet, kissed by late morning light. Sun spilled through the branches above, warming the stone path beneath their feet. Flowers stretched in soft bloom, untouched by the world's noise. Chantel sat on the wooden bench beside Cole's stroller, watching him giggle as a butterfly danced near his toes. Jackson stood a few steps away, hands tucked into his pockets, eyes soft. He'd waited for the right moment, not a perfect one, just a true one. "Can I sit?" he asked. She nodded, her smile cautious but open. He lowered himself beside her, not saying anything at first, just watching Cole, the miracle between them. Finally, he exhaled. "You didn't just save my son. You saved me." Chantel turned slightly, her brow creasing. "I didn't know how lost I was," he said. "Grief had become my identity. But you walked in with nothing but love and gave him life. And somehow you gave it back to me too." Tears welled in her eyes. "I've seen what real love looks like now," he continued. "It's not perfect. It's not painless. But it's present. It stays." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring. No diamonds, no spectacle, just meaning. "I don't have grand speeches. I just have this. A promise that I'll never run from the hard stuff again. That I'll show up with faith, with honesty, with grace. For you, for Cole, for whatever we build next." Chantel's hand flew to her mouth. The tears came, unchecked this time. I never thought I'd get another chance. I buried hope the day they buried Caleb. Jackson reached for her hand. Then let's plant something new. Not in his place, but in honor of the love you still carry. She nodded slowly, tears falling like rain. Then, finally, she whispered, yes. Not out of pity, not out of fear, but out of healing. 1 year later, Cole's laughter filled the park, echoing through the trees as he ran clumsily across the grass, a pinwheel spinning in his hand. Chantel chased him, barefoot in the grass, her joy no longer clouded by grief, but shaped by it, softened by it. Jackson waited near the blanket with sandwiches, smiling as he watched them, his son, his wife, his family. Later, in their new home, a cozy bungalow filled with light and fingerprints on the walls, Chantel tucked Cole into bed. He grabbed her finger sleepily and whispered, "Mama, stay." "I'll always stay," she whispered back. Downstairs, Jackson waited with 2 mugs of tea. They sat together on the porch, side by side, hands intertwined. No fancy lights, no perfect script, just peace. Final reflection. Love had rebuilt what grief tried to destroy. It hadn't erased the pain, but it had rewritten the story. Because family isn't made by blood alone. It's made by courage. The courage to love, to forgive, to stay.
If this story touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe. And remember, God can use even the hardest moments to bring healing and new beginnings.